The time I was followed by a gang member by U/KF1746. This happened a few years ago when I was just days shy of my 30th birthday. I was just returning to the office in the middle of the afternoon after a not-so-quick trip to the DMV to renew my driver's license. At that time, I worked for a major corporation that was headquartered in downtown. The company had several parking garages, but unless you're a director or above at the company, you have to park several blocks away from the headquarters. So, I had just left one of our parking garages about a block and a half away from my office when I heard someone begin walking behind me. Now, mind you, this is a major city with a bustling downtown, so obviously nothing out of the ordinary there. I assumed it was most likely a fellow employee. That is, until I glanced at the ground behind me. This employee was wearing athletic socks tucked into slip-on Adidas sandals, so definitely not an employee of a Fortune 10 returning to the office. I picked up my pace, and so did he. We had recently had several violent attacks on our employees by homeless people, so my company had stationed dozens of police officers and security guards around our campus as a precaution. I quickly made my way across the crosswalk to the courtyard where they all congregated, hoping to catch their attention as this person behind me closed in on me. But not a single one took notice, just oblivious. So, the person behind me followed me into the building. At this point, I am too nervous. If his intention was to mug me, he had to be really fucking stupid doing so while surrounded by police and security guards in a corporate headquarters building. We have a Starbucks in our lobby that was always packed in mid-afternoon. So, knowing he'd have no opportunity to make a move on me with so many people around, I made my way into the coffee line. I finally mustered the courage to turn around, and he was gone. There, see? I told myself. Just wanted to make off with my bag. Now he's gone. After 15 minutes of waiting on my coffee, I began making my way out of Starbucks. There's this tiny little nook that's out of eyeshot of the waiting line. As I passed it though, I saw a pair of socks tucked into Adidas sandals. And when I walked out, he resumed his pursuit. That's the moment that my blood ran cold. He wasn't looking for just any target. He'd chosen me. He was determined to finish the job, and about 20 feet ahead of me was our security desk. On either side of the security desk are sets of 3 security turnstiles, which only open with an employee badge or when opened by a security guard. Once again, I tried desperately to make eye contact with the security guard. She was on another planet. I basically sprinted through the turnstile, and once I'd made it safely to the other side, I turned around to face my pursuer. He was a kid, no older than 17 or 18, Hispanic, with a fade haircut. He had a small tattoo above his left eyebrow, a sleeve of tattoos up his right arm, black pants, and a baggy red t-shirt. Despite everyone around, he stood his ground at the turnstile. And then he pushed on the glass gates, and pushed again. I shot a look at security. She was still clueless, but it was the metamorphosis of facial expressions on this kid's face that scared me the most. At first, it was blank. Is he on drugs? I asked myself, but it was quickly replaced by something else. It was fear. He looked genuinely terrified, like if he didn't succeed in getting to me, something bad was going to happen to him. He pushed on the gate once more, and his look of terror quickly evolved into a look of sheer determination. I walked behind the wall separating our elevator banks from our security desk and walked to the other set of turnstiles. When I noticed an unoccupied security guard. On the other side of the turnstiles, the kid mirrored my movements. "Ma'am," I told the guard, "this kid just followed me from the parking garage into the headquarters, into and out of Starbucks, and just attempted not once, not twice, but 3 times to force open the turnstiles, and no one noticed." At this point, I was shaking with fear, so she assured me she'd notify officers to force him out of the building. When I went upstairs and told the colleague what happened, she told me that I need to file a report with our company's asset protection. Think ex-military, security, police, those types. So, I did. A few hours later, I got a call from one of the higher-ups in asset protection, a former Secret Service member, and the guy who provides personal security to our CEO. He insisted on walking me to my car that evening. The following day, around the same time of the afternoon that the kid followed me the day before, I get a text from my new friend in asset protection. It's a photo of the kid. He asked, "Is this your guy?" I answered, "Yes. Where is he?" He answered, "Well, sitting right outside the entrance of the headquarters. He's 18 years old and has several gang tattoos." Question: When he followed you, did he say anything? Any catcalling, chirps, anything of that sort? I answered, "No, he just followed me. He never said anything. Why, is that bad?" He answered, "Call me." So, I did. I learned what gang he was in based on his tattoos, which I won't reveal here for safety reasons. I learned that I was clearly targeted, and that the fact that he said nothing to me implied that his intent, whatever it was clearly very bad. He then asked me to have me put my manager on the phone and told both of us that I needed to stay away from headquarters for at least a few weeks until they deemed the situation safe again. So for the next 3 weeks, I worked out of my stepdad's office, because we didn't know if the gang kid had targeted me at the DMV or after I'd already parked downtown. We also didn't know how much he knew about me, so I was told to stay at my parents' house until it was safe to return. My husband and I had just moved into our new house. What gets really interesting is that my stepdad happens to be in intelligence as well. After he and his colleagues did some digging, it turns out that this particular gang had recently gotten heavily involved in human trafficking. I asked one of my stepdad's colleagues why they targeted me. Weren't younger girls usually a target? Granted that I did look quite a bit younger than 30. He then told me the price someone my age could be sold for, and I felt sick. After 3 weeks, the kid disappeared, but not without some intimidating persuasion. He apparently showed up once more during my absence, and we learned that he occasionally rode with his dad to go pick up his little brother at the charter school down the road. His dad would go inside the school for 20 to 30 minutes every single day, so they think the kid had someone nearby assigning him tasks, or whatever the terminology is. I'm clearly very unfamiliar with that world. On that day 3 weeks before, I was the task. So one day, my stepdad's colleague, also ex-Secret Service, sat on a bench waiting for him to show up. When the kid's dad went into the school, my stepdad's colleague, who is 6'7", stood up, walked right up to the passenger window where the kid was sitting, smiled, took out his phone, and snapped a photo of the kid's face before walking away. Apparently, the kid lost it. "Oh, who are you? Why'd you do that, man?" The kid never came back after that day. Easily the scariest 3 weeks of my life, not knowing if this gang member had simply developed a very aggressive crush on me, or if his intentions were much, much more sinister. The one good thing that came out of all of it, asset protection moved me into the director and above parking garage, which had an underground entrance to our office. And I never had to walk those crazy downtown streets alone again after that.
I think there was someone living in my shed. By CreepsSpaghett, narrated by 242 Reads. Title says it all, but it also doesn't say anything. Lately, I've noticed something off about home. Like there's something else there with me, my wife, and our 2 dogs. But I have not been able to put my finger on it until today. For some context, I live in a duplex. We share the property with another guy in his mid-20s. He has his own house, and we have ours. But we share the laundry room that leads to our representative backyards that are separated by a fence. This all started around 2 months ago when the guy sent me a text. "Hey man, just a heads up, someone stole my bike out of the sunroom." This is extra creepy because to get to our son/laundry room, you would need to hop the brick fence surrounded by shrubbery trees and then hurl the bike over. Unless the thief had the most massive pair of balls ever and walk it out through our front doors when we weren't home. Either way, I didn't feel right and made more of an effort to keep our door locked. Fast forward to a couple weeks ago, I let my dogs into the backyard and one of them started sniffing around the shed. No big deal. The lizards are coming out with it heating up. They probably just chased one under the door. I finally got them to come in, but didn't give it much thought. I hardly ever go into the shed. Nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of out of the way, and I'm not really a hang out in the shed type of guy. So we generally use it for storage. Suitcases, furniture that doesn't fit/match the house, camping stuff. You know, boring suburban shit. We probably enter it maybe 3 times a year. After the 18th day in a row of my dogs being curious about the shed, I decided to have a look-see to see if maybe there was a kimono dragon or something in there since they wouldn't let this thing go. Nope, no kimono. But what I did find literally made me piss myself just a bit. Just a few drops. Inside the shed was the bike that my neighbor had stolen a little while back. My first thought was, oh fuck, my wife is a klepto. But quickly ruled that out. She doesn't even like to bike. Then I was briefly worried that my neighbor thought that I was the thief. I mean, it is my shed. I don't know how to explain that if he found out. Plus, I wanted to give him his bike back. I kept looking around and found one of our sleeping bags unraveled but balled up behind a box. Inside of it was a sack of what looked like to be around $20 in change and singles. There was also a bag for garbage that had a lot of food wrappers inside. Eventually, my brain accepted what it was ultimately denying at first and put 2 and 2 together. Someone, I don't know, is living in my shed. Or at least was. Maybe my dogs spooked them off, or maybe they sleep there every night and leave during the day. If they weren't coming back, why would they leave the change? I left everything how I found it, and thinking about what I should do next. Whoever did it must have gone in through the spare set of keys I keep hidden in my backyard. I locked up and brought them inside with me tonight. Hopefully, whoever it is gets the message and moves on. I'm going to install cameras tomorrow. I will keep you guys updated if anything more happens. Please hope for the best that this person isn't a lunatic.
A true story. The first time I saw a shadow person, by Stache. I've always had beliefs in ghosts, spirits, the paranormal, etc. My family has ingrained that into my core beliefs, and from half of what I've experienced, I don't doubt its validity. I have started to write horror, one of the genres I'm highly interested in. Just not the ghost horror stuff, because screw messing with that kind of stuff. Anyway, here's my story. It was about 4 years ago now. So I was working after everyone in the building had left. It was around 7 or 8 when it occurred. I was doing the most tedious part of my job at the end of the day. It was taking longer than I anticipated, but I was there for the long haul. While working, I was listening to a new podcast to replace the silence around the building. To give you a premise, my office has 1 window and 2 doorways accessing the rooms attached to it. My office is the only one holding any light in the building, while the rest is covered in darkness. This all happened during a heavy rainstorm as well. I only had about a half hour of work left when I took a look at the doorway closest to me. I was about 2 meters away when through the window door, I saw a silhouette of a man. This silhouette was much darker than the darkness of the room behind it. Light from my office was pouring out and could have illuminated the silhouette, letting me see their hair, eyes, skin, yet all of it remained dark. What the light did show me was the details of a face, yet all the details were completely dark. It looked 3D, yet the light couldn't expose any other details. Like a mannequin, yet pitch black doesn't do justice for what I saw. It was leaning right against the glass, causing mist to form around the glass beneath its nostrils, as if it were breathing against the window. The sweaty indentation of a forehead against the glass also formed. It just stared at me. I was terrified as hell and didn't know what to do. As far as I knew, no one was left in the building except me. If it was a coworker, they would have had to turn the light on to see, yet off the lights remained. Didn't feel normal, it felt very off. I finished my job quickly and left work minutes later. On my way out, I noticed nothing else strange. Nothing out of place, no one hiding, no one stalking me. Just an uneasy feeling of being watched. The following day, I took a look in the detail of the glass of my office doors. The face impression was still there. I even wiped away the condensation still lingering. I asked my coworkers, and they all told me that the building had a history of ghosts being seen, and other paranormal things happening. It doesn't really get any creepier than that here. After work ended the following day, I looked it up and found out that what I witnessed was a shadow person. I still find it so fascinating and horrifying. I do admit I may want to see something like that again, but I don't want to do something to trigger that to happen. That's the scariest thing I've ever experienced. So far, at least.
In 2008, I was driving from New Orleans, Louisiana, to Eugene, Oregon. It was just me, 22 female, and my year-old pit bull in a 14-foot U-Haul truck with everything I owned crammed into the back, a fancy flip phone, and my printout of MapQuest directions. I think the first smartphones actually came out around that time, but I didn't have one. Cell phone service was also much spottier, and there were long stretches through the desert where I had zero service for hundreds of miles. I was driving a lonely stretch of highway through central Texas when I realized I hadn't seen a town or exit for a very long time, and my giant U-Haul was really low on gas. Just when I'm starting to freak out and seriously run out of gas, I see a small town coming up. I pull into this town and it is tiny. I was so worried about other things that I never did pay attention to the name of the town, but there were only about 6 streets in the whole place. I go gas up and am ready to get back on the road, except I cannot for the life of me find my way back to the highway. I circle the town about 4 times and start getting so frustrated because this is such a tiny town. How can I not find my way out? I can literally see the highway, but I can't get to it. I return to the gas station to ask for directions. Now, when I got gas, I paid at the pump and never went in. When I enter for directions, there's a skinny, nondescript guy who has black hair hanging down in front of his eyes that looks like it could use a good wash. He's not particularly creepy, but a little rude. He never really met my eyes. He was looking down at a magazine. He gives me directions that don't sound right at all. He's telling me to take a road that will get me to the highway in about 17 miles. For a moment, I'm dumbfounded. Then I point out that I didn't drive that far to get from the highway into town. Why so far to get back to the highway? I can literally see it from the town. He is so casual, almost like I'm just an annoyance, and can follow his directions or not. Why should he care? He gives me some explanation about the road curving around that doesn't really make sense. He still doesn't look at me. Just whatever. I gave you your directions, and waved his hand in the direction of the door. When I got into the parking lot, my whole body started trembling violently, and my heart started racing, seemingly for no reason. I get into the truck, and as soon as I put the key into the ignition, I burst into tears. I had the most terrible feeling that, no matter how nonchalant he acted, this man had bad intentions. I didn't know what, but I knew right then and there that there was no way I was going to follow his directions. Yet, this was the only store in this little town, and short of knocking on doors, there was no one else to ask for directions. I decided I didn't give a shit if this town seemed like something dropped out of the Twilight Zone. I was going to drive around until I found my own way out, even if it took all damn night. Then, a big red beat of a pickup truck, as much rust as metal, pulls up and disgorged the quintessential Texan man. Huge, husky, and in flannel and work boots. Without even thinking about it, I jumped out of the truck and approached him quickly yet warily. Looking into his eyes, I saw a kind human being, or at least I was hoping I did. I asked him if he could please give me directions to the highway. I told him I knew it was silly, but I just couldn't seem to find my way back. He looked concerned as I was visibly upset, so he made me laugh and very cheerfully gave me directions for a hairpin curve turnoff right at the end of the small concrete tunnel I had passed several times. He said it often confused travelers because it was so hard to see. They needed to put up signs, etc. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I asked him how many miles it was back to the highway. He laughed and gave me a funny look. "Miles, miss?" I'd say it's a quarter mile at most. You can see the highway right from here. At this point, I couldn't help it. I had to know. What happens if I drive? And I gave him the directions the man in the store had given me. Texas looked at me very intently and asked me how I knew about that route. It was pretty far out, and usually only locals knew about it. So I told him. He was quiet for a few minutes, and then asked what the attendant looked like, and if I had a map of the state. Nope, just my MapQuest, which wasn't helpful in this situation. He goes to his truck and grabs a raggedy local map from his glove box. Spreading it out for me, he traces the route I describe. The way the man from the gas station had told me to go led away from town, away from the interstate, and led to, seemingly, the middle of nowhere. Texas told me that the road did go about 17 miles, right before it dead-ended in the desert. I asked him what was out there, and he told me that it was nothing but some junked cars and a few trailers and mobile homes, all owned by the same family. This family was known locally as troublemakers, meth heads, and alcoholics, and these were the nice things townspeople had to say about them. And the erstwhile clerk was part of this family and lived down that road. I'll never forget the look in Texas's eyes as he told me this. He also told me that I was smart to listen to my instincts, and he told me to be careful traveling out there. I don't know if the man from the gas station wanted what was in the back of my U-Haul, or what was in the driver's seat, but thankfully, I didn't have to find out. Oh, and I learned that sometimes angels look like ruddy-haired Texans with scruffy faces and rusty pickups. Thank you, random Texan stranger. You really saved my ass, and I will always remember you with tons of love. Sorry I didn't ask your name. You're forever Texas to me now.
So me and 5 of my friends all decided to go on a trip to Wyoming to go camping, hiking, and whatnot, maybe 5 years back. For reference, we're all from Wisconsin. We'd actually broken the trip out to Wyoming into 2 days, and on the first day, we covered a fair bit of ground. The second day, when we actually made it to Wyoming around noonish, we stopped at a small mom-and-pop gas station, I can't remember the name, to refuel and get a bite to eat. I was fueling the van while everyone else went inside to get food and whatnot. As I was standing by the pump, I happened to notice 2 dirty, greasy-haired country-looking guys staring at me. I just glanced at them before looking away, and at that moment, everybody came out with the food. I looked at the 2 guys from my peripheral, and they were now staring at my friends with what I found to be an unsettling look. I caught their attention and locked eyes with them, staring them down and trying to communicate that I didn't appreciate their staring. We all got back in the van and drove off, and I soon forgot about those 2 guys. We eventually arrived at our campsite, parked at our area, and started setting up camp. The first 2 days were a blast. We hiked and even found a swimming hole to swim around in, but the third night is when things really went down. I had woken up sometime in the middle of the night, which isn't unusual for me, but once my eyes adjusted, I noticed 2 guys standing over my friend, who we'll call Brad, whom I was sharing a tent with. The guys were facing away from me, and though I couldn't tell what they were doing, I knew it couldn't be anything good. So I reached into my bag beside me and pulled out my concealed carry 9mm that I had brought with me and trained it on one of the guys. Everything that happened next happened relatively fast, and I may be misremembering some of it, and I may be telling it out of order. I fired 2 shots, winging him pretty good, and he let out a pained scream. They bolted out of the tent, and I rushed after them, firing 2 more shots in their direction. Everyone except 2 of our friends, Jake and Jolene, fake names of course, rushed out scared and confused. I quickly explained what had happened and told someone to check on Jake and Jolene, but they wouldn't wake up, which made me think those 2 men must have drugged them. What happened next scared the hell out of all of us. All manner of people came running out from behind various trees and bushes surrounding our area, and I don't mean 1 or 2 people, I mean dozens of them. I fired the rest of my magazine at these strange people, and all but screamed for everyone to get in the van. We drove until we hit the nearest ranger station, where we all piled in, and the guy on duty who'd been asleep came stumbling in from the back. Confused and groggy, he asked what was wrong, and I told him our story. He tried to call the police, but I guess he either couldn't get a signal or it was too late in the evening to reach anyone. We stayed there in the ranger station until morning, and the ranger finally got through to the cops, and they sent a deputy to our location. We led the deputy back to our campsite, explaining everything along the way. When we got there, the deputy only found a small bit of blood from the guy that I shot, and a good deal of footprints. The deputy basically told us that there wasn't really much he could do, except make a report, but we didn't really care. Once he left, we just packed up our belongings and headed back home. I shudder to think what would have happened had I not woken up when I did. I don't know what those men planned to do with all of us, and I don't care to know. I'm just happy that we all made it out safe.
Have you ever been followed home from work? No? Good for you. No, me. I wasn't so lucky and I'm still paranoid about it. I work at a retail store. Most people already know this about me, so it's no secret as to what I do at my job. I deal with idiot people on a day-to-day basis who think it's necessary to shoplift. Like seriously, you know my co-workers and I are watching you, so what's the point? Well, one guy and his wife took it too far when I told them that they were no longer welcomed at the store. It happened in November, shortly before I got COVID. I didn't feel good that day, nor I was in the mood to deal with anyone's bullshit. I had to work a long shift due to having a lot of people call in. All of the regular customers who thought it was the great idea to steal from the store was hitting us hard that day. I'm not sure how many people I had caught trying to steal the most useless and inexpensive shit, but it was ridiculous. The customers I referred to in the previous statement though, they came into the store every day to steal body wash, clothes, literally anything they could find that had an abundance of stock, so it wouldn't really be noticed until later on when employees would be taking inventory. I greeted the customers as I always had, told them that the store required everyone to wear a mask, into which they told me that they had asthma and couldn't wear one. Now, I'm going to get a lot of backlash on this, but I have severe asthma, plus I smoke cigarettes and still wear a mask, so their health excuse was total bullshit. I told them okay. They were free to enter the store because there's nothing that I can do when someone says that they have a health reason. They sneered at me and said, "Yeah, that's what I thought." Into which I responded, "You don't have asthma, you just scumbags who can say that and get what you want." Probably not the smartest thing for me to say, but again, I didn't feel good. They went to the store, did their normal 3-hour round, taking every item possible, and decided that they were going to try and go out on the other side of the doors in the opposite side of the store, where they thought I wasn't going to be. Guess again, I moved from door to door because that's what my job is. They weren't too happy to see me there while I was absolutely thrilled to see them. Justice was finally happening. I told them to put the items down, leave it with me, and get out of the store because I had banned them 3 months ago and now they would be transpassed. Ha! Another screw up on my part. These people were so mad that they parked their car in the parking lot, waited for the end of my shift to figure out which car I drove and followed me out of the parking lot. Look, I don't usually get off until 10 o'clock at night, so I'm exhausted by that time and have to focus on driving 35 to 40 minutes to my town. The couple decided to follow me the entire way. With their bright lights on, they would speed up, nearly hit my bumper and slow back down. They would honk their horn at me and play this game where they would pass me, then slam on their brakes, pull over to the shoulder of the road and wait to get back behind me. That highway is dangerous enough and I hate driving on it, so imagine how bad my anxiety was while I was driving that night. 20 minutes into my drive home, I was frustrated as hell, and so I turned for one of the back roads that I know like the back of my hand. I made that turn so fast they had to slam on their brakes and whip a quick U-turn. They were hell-bent on following me. My car twisted and turned, went up and down every hill of the back roads, and I was having fun doing it because I was going to be followed home when I live in the middle of nowhere. 2 hours later, I finally made it to my town. They're still following me, so I made it to the parking lot of the police station. They drove past the station and I sped out of there like 90 to nothing. I took the longest possible road home and finally was able to rest for the night. I still see them driving in my town. So, to the couple that took my words too far, I was doing my damn job and you two are just stupid fucking idiots that need to get a job and stop wasting your time trying to figure out where I live. You won't find me.
Followed me by a car. Written by Anonymous and narrated by Lady Spookaria. This is a reminder for people to always stay safe. I don't know what could have happened, but I doubt it was anything good. So, I guess I should start my story. I don't like going out at night on my own as it is. I lived in one of the rougher areas of town where the crime rate was high. So, the idea of being out at night wasn't a great one. I always grew up looking over my shoulder just in case anything would happen. I have a pretty good sense about these sorts of things. You could say I'm fairly street smart. If, on the rare occasion, I had to walk somewhere late at night, I'd take my taser with me, but I try to avoid going out at night at all. I got a job at the local corner gas station, and it was my shift. I already had to deal with my share of petty crime, and I knew what to do in a tricky situation. We've had people come in and try to rob the place more than once. I'm tiny too, about 5'2", but I can handle myself. My shift ended late in the night, or rather, it was the early morning. When I got off work, my bus didn't show up. And this wasn't uncommon. Public transportation isn't always reliable or entirely safe in my area. So I texted my brother as a backup. Normally, my boss or a family member would come to pick me up to make sure I got home safe. My boss was a good dude. That is, if the bus didn't get there in time. Unfortunately for me, neither my boss nor my older brother were able to come pick me up to take me home. I was a little worried. I didn't bring my taser with me, but I had to get home. I knew not to get involved in anyone else's business, to walk like I had somewhere to be. Not look scared, but not look like I wanted to fight either. I took a deep breath and left the bus stop. I fiddled with my keys, putting each one between my fingers, and walked down the pathway. I could hear sounds of people yelling at each other, dogs barking, and the occasional car would drive past. All of this was pretty normal. I had to walk down the main street until I had to turn onto one of the smaller streets my apartment was on. I kept walking when I noticed that somebody was slowly driving behind me. I'd heard stories of girls being grabbed at night, and I didn't want to join their number. I kept walking, pretending that I didn't notice anything was different, and I didn't look back. Sometimes, these sorts of creeps got off on knowing that you're scared. When I was about halfway home, I could see the headlights, and with a sideward glance, I saw a man sitting in the car. He was watching me. Intently. He looked at me without blinking or moving. I had to cross a road that led onto one of the quiet streets nearby. But he cut me off. I tried to go behind the car. He began to reverse it and sped up when I tried to go in front. I was starting to get really scared now. I couldn't hide it anymore. All I can remember was his cold, dead eyes. He gestured for me to get in. I shook my head and I knew I didn't have a lot of time to think. I acted purely on impulse. Since he was blocking my path home, and I didn't want to lead him back there anyway, I decided to head back for work. I could have gone to one of the houses, but it wasn't uncommon for them to ignore requests to come in. That's how high the crime rate was here. I turned and began to run back to my workplace. I could see the lights briefly. My lungs ached, and I was breathless by the time I reached my workplace. When I got inside, my coworker helped me. I watched the man through the glass. I knew deep down he had bad intentions towards me, but I tried to get a look at both the car and the number plate. My coworker knew that something must have happened. He reassured me and checked to see if I was okay. Then he called the cops for me and made sure I waited inside the store where I was safe rather than waiting outside. The cops came and I gave my statement, and my family came to pick me up. Since then, my family always insists on picking me up from work, and as soon as I'm able to drive myself, I'll drive. I'm not walking home alone ever again, especially in this area. Stay safe out there.
I've been running in these woods for as long as I can remember. But this might make me change my mind. The story began at around 6:30 PM. I had finished eating and decided to go on a run as usual. I always use the same path, cross the street, run for about 1 kilometer, and pass the gate that goes into the woods. Something important to note is that the trail I use in the forest is separated about halfway through. One path is paved, and the other isn't. I usually go into the unpaved path first, and then turn into the paved one after about 3 kilometers. Nothing ever really goes wrong. I meet some rare people walking their dogs, but other than that, I'm pretty alone. At least, I thought I was. I had been running for a while now, when I heard a notification coming from my phone. An airdrop notification. Since I didn't want to make it look like I was worried, I kept running for a couple of minutes, and then stopped to change the music. I opened the airdrop dreadfully. Who the hell was sending me stuff? I was pretty sure I was alone. I clicked on the drop, and my heart sunk. It was a Snapchat picture of me running with the caption, "You look good." I didn't turn around. Instead, I kept running like nothing happened until I reached a certain point. You see, the forest is surrounded by a fence to stop children from coming in unsupervised, and I didn't like that rule when I was little, so my friends and I cut a hole in it. When I was aligned with that hole, I quickly turned and buried myself into the forest, aiming for my escape. I could hear ruffling behind me, and I still didn't turn back. When I finally reached the hole, I jumped through it and absolutely booked it to the fire station that was a couple of streets down. The last things I could hear when leaving the forest was an angry huff and metal meeting metal. I still don't know who it was or what they wanted from me, but I never ran in that forest again. So, creepy stalker guy, or whatever you are, I truly hope we never, ever meet.
My Encounter with a Demon by PA Nightmares. So, this happened around 3 years ago. I had just got off work, and it was around 12 a.m., give or take. I was actually on a Discord call with some of my friends. As I was driving, I realized there was a human-shaped shadow keeping pace with my car. I told my friends in Discord what I was seeing, and they said it was not good. I continued to drive, and this thing is still beside me. A tractor and trailer came by and hit the shadow with its high beams, and it dissipated. I finished my drive home in peace. By the time I got home, I had forgotten about the experience. Getting out of my car, I had to get stuff out of my back seat. As I was getting my stuff out of my car and ready to carry inside, I heard something whisper my name into my ear. Not only that, I felt the warmth of its breath on the back of my neck. After this occurred, I of course noped the fuck out of there. I ran to my front porch while trying not to trip over my feet in a panic and fall on my face. Yes, I know this sounds comical, but understand, I live on a haunted property near Gettysburg. Seeing spirits has become a normal occurrence for me. This thing felt different. I felt dread engulf me. I knew I was in danger, so after getting to my front porch, I turned around to see a shadow standing still by my car and my door open, items left all over the driveway. It was waving and smiling at me. I told my sister what happened. She poked fun, of course, but came out with me to get my stuff. I got inside and relaxed, thinking I was safe, but night brought the worst of it. So, everything was normal until I went to bed. Once I fell asleep, I was plagued with horrible nightmares. Well, just one actually, but it kept playing on repeat. There's a pale woman on the floor by my bed on all fours. I knew I was in danger, so I grabbed the nearest sharp object, which happened to be a number 2 pencil, and stabbed her through the hand. She did not bleed, and leapt onto the wall, where she hung there like she was freaking Spider-Man. Now, let me say this, I have and am not scared of much. However, I do subscribe to the if it bleeds it can die mentality, so this thing not bleeding scared the living hell out of me. After stabbing it, I woke up and I noticed a shadow by the side of my bed. I've had sleep paralysis before, twice in fact, this time made the third, and I have never once felt like my life was actually in danger. This time, waking up, I felt that I was in fact in a fight for my life and my very soul. I forced myself out of this paralysis, as I had the prior 2 times that I had it. This time, however, I went straight for my mom's Bible that I have kept in a dresser drawer ever since she passed away. Let me tell you, I opened that book up to the book of Psalms, and I read from 3 a.m. to around 7. When the sun had risen enough that I felt safe, I finally allowed myself to get a little more sleep. I have seen this demon outside my house on several different occasions, but it has not been able to re-enter my house. I asked my pastor about this, and he said I had encountered a demon, and fighting back and using my faith as armor in this fight, I had cleansed my house and made it a place where this thing cannot enter again. This is one of the scariest things that I've ever had happen to me, and I'd prefer to never deal with that kind of entity again. I miss my mom dearly, but I feel that her, my faith, and that Bible saved my life that night. The Shadow in the Woods by PA Nightmares. Hi, I don't recall this very often, but it is still terrifying to think about. I had just recently graduated from high school and was around 18 or 19 years old. My older sister and I decided we wanted to do something special for Halloween. So, for the first time ever, we decided to go to the Gettysburg battlefield and do one of the ghost tours. We had lived near Gettysburg all of our lives, and I had never actually had visited the Gettysburg battlefield outside of school trips. Because we went to the battlefield so frequently for high school field trips, I had never really felt the interest in going back. Also, just a side note, up until this point, I didn't believe the supernatural existed. I thought it was all bullshit. But that all changed during this tour. The tour started off at a bed and breakfast, where my older sister and I interacted with a child spirit. Upon entering the basement, I clocked a table filled with children's toys. Thought this was odd, and wondered what they were there for. However, didn't ask any questions. We just sat and waited for the tour guide to start their tale. According to the guide, this basement was home to a harmless spirit of a little boy that had died during the Battle of Gettysburg. As they continued to tell their story, my sister screamed and yelled that someone was playing with her hair. Her guides just laughed and told her not to worry. The little boy was drawn to teachers and new mothers. At this point, she was both, so this made sense that he was drawn to her. After they were done telling their tale, we got up and made to leave. However, one of the tour guides stopped me and my sister. They asked my sister to please empty her pockets, not because they thought she stole anything, but because she was leaving with an additional item. See, that little boy liked to give the teachers and the caregivers gifts. And in her pocket was one of the toys that I clocked upon entering the basement. It was a little red car. So my sister gave it back, but the tour guide said this was the little boy's way of saying that he liked you. So we proceeded out into the battlefield, where the tour guide gave us a history of the battle and who died there, etc. But I noticed a path that was clearly once a path that was used. I asked why this area said do not enter. The tour guide said that the area is off limits due to a Confederate soldier that has claimed that area as his territory. Being young, dumb, and too arrogant for my own good, I asked, "Can I go there?" Our tour guide said I could, but she didn't advise it. I went despite the warning. As I entered the woods, I felt a shift in the energy. My body wanted me to turn around and leave. However, I chose not to, and as I walked further in, I heard the guide shout into me to not cross the fallen tree. I got to the tree, and I was like, fuck this, I'm crossing this tree. I put my foot on the tree, and it was like my entire body just locked up, and I could not go any further. The next thing that transpired took just moments, but it felt like everything had stopped. I heard a horse walking, and it stopped no more than 15 feet from me. But I saw no horse, and the next thing you know, I heard a packing sound, a click, and then a loud bang with a flash of light. I felt something whiz by my head. As this happened, the trance was broken and I was able to move again. So, I noped the fuck out of there faster than I knew I was capable of. Being shut up by a ghost was something I never expected, nor wanted to happen. Ever since that night, I've had several encounters with shadow people. I am not sure if they are connected, but up until this point, I had never had any encounters with the supernatural. However, I'd be lying if I said a part of me didn't wonder what would happen if I got shot by that ghost.
Do you want to know the most terrifying experience? I'll tell you one of the almost worst experiences that I have ever had, and it all goes back to when I was 17. For clarification, I started smoking at the age of 15. Now at that age it was tough to acquire, let alone smoke a cigarette. So a few months before my 18th birthday, I had begun going on walks at midnight in order to smoke without being caught. Plus, I could actually take the time to enjoy the taste of tobacco, instead of just sucking it down as fast as possible. The neighborhood that I lived in at the time wasn't particularly the best, but there was something about walking around the block, listening to music, Messaging the friends that I had met online and the ones in real life while smoking when I wasn't supposed to be was thrilling. It was a real rush of adrenaline. My nightly ritual was fun for the first few weeks until I got the sense that someone was watching me. I'll admit that I was scared when the feeling of being watched first washed over me. I carried a pocket knife with me, so it wasn't like I didn't know that I could defend myself if need be. It was more or less the fact that I would have to potentially stab someone if they were to try and attack me, which is why I asked my younger brother to start walking with me. My brother was only 1 year younger than myself. Putting the two of us together was a dangerous combination because we grew up fighting each other and the neighbor kids. We could fight. My brother and I did the nightly thing for about another 2 months. Then when February came, but the feeling of being watched intensified, and this time, I wasn't the only one who felt it. There was one particular night about 5 days before my birthday when my brother and I were walking. We were halfway around the block when someone whistled. We stopped dead in our tracks, slowly looked at each other. My brother nodded and we took off 90-0 back to our house, ran inside, and locked the door behind us. We went to my room and told my younger sister what happened. We shut the bedroom light off and used the light of our phone screens to see each other. The three of us talked for about 30 to 35 minutes when we decided to go to the kitchen and get a drink. We had just walked in front of the door when the handle started to slightly jiggle. The three of us stopped, listening to the door handle as well as the clock on the wall ticking. The handle started jingling more furiously, which caused us to cautiously kneel down and slowly crawl back through the house and into my room where we fell asleep on the floor. The next morning, our grandmother told us about how one of the neighbors' house was broken into and the woman was assaulted. We sure as heck were relieved that we had a deadbolt on the front door and a gun inside the house in case the robber had broken into our house. Suffice it to say, I never want to be in that situation again, despite being much older now.
Alone at Night. Written and narrated by Josie Kitty. I could feel myself going stir-crazy in that small town. At that point in my life, I was in my early to mid-20s. Having lived in the same tiny town since forever, and with it being in the middle of nowhere, I yearned for something more. Summertime, with its balmy nights and allure of desired adventures, brought this out even more so. I would take walks many evenings, mostly with my family, and leisurely strolls provided a mental release. Other times, however, the capacity to remain patient in my life became too much to withstand. So, in frustration, I often would burst out my front door alone and take a rapid cruise around the town in my wheelchair to blow off some steam. One evening, such an event occurred, as it did many other times before, only this time, this small-town girl, wrapped up in the grandeur of the dreams swirling around in her head, would receive a lesson in her naivety. The streets were very dark at night. Small-town folks liked it this way, though. But it always gave me a creepy vibe, because most people went to bed fairly early, which made it even darker. You never knew who was watching you from behind their curtains. If anyone at all, that is. On this particular evening, I kind of wished somebody had been. Small towns bring about shady characters, so they say. But awareness on such matters becomes distorted, as everyone seems harmless, or at least the faults they had committed become forgotten and somehow forgiven. So you let your guard down. I wasn't thinking about that on this particular night, however. What I was thinking about was my future, and how I could escape the confines of my small hometown, and my desperation overwhelming me. I remember strolling some blocks casually, and others at a rapid pace, depending on lighting or if people drove or walked past, which really wasn't that often. I passed in front of the local grocery store, and down the right side of it, keeping to the sidewalk, a large white van drove past me and through the intersection. As I crossed the street, I noticed them abruptly stopping ahead of me and sitting there for a minute. Before I decided to turn left on an adjacent sidewalk, they began backing up rather quickly, which struck me as odd, but I proceeded. Continuing my path, I noticed them drive past me once again, up the street a little ways, until they got to the next intersection. They then suddenly took a U-turn in the middle of this intersection, and drove past me a third time. Their headlights blared at me, but I chose to not look in their direction, because at this point I was fairly spooked. This particular street was rather dark, which added to my fear, so I picked up my pace. Coming up to the lit intersection, I spotted a residence which I knew well, as my parents were acquainted with them. I remember a wash of relief came over me after seeing that their lights were on and their front door propped open, probably to cool the house down. So I hurried along my way and slowly strolled by, taking my time in front of said house. That's when the van drove by yet another time, but sped off towards the main road that eventually connected to the highway. I remember taking a deep breath and trying to remain calm. Nothing bad could happen to me in this wholesome little town, could it? At least I tried to convince myself of that. My anxiety wasn't over yet, however. I still had a ways to go, and the direction I was headed meant I'd end up along that same centrally located main road. I didn't want to risk the chance of them driving past me another time, so I made the decision to book it towards the school grounds. I could safely bypass the road while remaining hidden in the shadows along the covered pathway behind the school. I also remember thinking that the school had a security camera system. I don't exactly know why my brain went here, but it comforted me in the moment. Amongst the shadows, my intended place of safety suddenly sent chills up my spine. The darkness enveloped me, and the rustling of trees and bushes that occurred from a slight breeze kept me on edge. Nearing the end of the school grounds, all that was left was to cross one more street, and I'd be a block from my house. However, this was along that same main road, and as I neared, I could feel the fear creeping up my spine again. I remember the wave of dread that engulfed my entire being when I spotted a lonely pair of headlights off in the distance, but I couldn't stop now. I floored it, wishing with all my might that my wheelchair would somehow gain speed miraculously. My heart pounded within my chest, but I was so close. I had the ramp up to my door within my sights. I had done it. I made it home. Nearing the ramp, I decided to turn and look down the road from the block that I had just come. I watched as a vehicle passed, heading towards the highway. I had no idea if it was even the same van, as I couldn't make it out. But at that point, I absolutely did not care. I was just relieved to have made it home safely, and with no terrifying incidents. Entering my house, I couldn't hold in my emotions in front of my parents. I blurted out the details of my perceived brush with terror, and in turn received both reassurances and lectures on keeping myself safe by not walking alone at night. I did heed this from then on, but I couldn't get the white van out of my head. I kept my eyes peeled around town for the type of van that allegedly followed me, with no luck, which made me even more nervous. Regardless, whoever it was, walks alone at night, especially in the middle of nowhere, are never a good idea.
A long time ago, my dad was seeing another woman behind my mum's back. A few years later, he decided to break it off with his mistress. This caused her to become mentally unstable. My sisters and I would occasionally see her stood on the road near our school, acting strange. She frightened us. My sisters were able to ignore her with ease, but I somehow felt sorry for her. She spoke to me occasionally, and when my sisters weren't there, I would always reply. After a while, she would say things like, "You're such a good girl. You're the best out of your sisters." One day, to my surprise, she gave me a Jenny doll. I was overjoyed. Since I am the youngest of my siblings, I would always get their hand-me-downs. I never had something new, something of my very own. Now this wasn't some old tattered doll, no. This was a brand new Jenny doll, just for me. I didn't want my sisters to get their hands on my new doll and take her for their own. Furthermore, I was sure that they would tell on me and Mum and Dad would take Jenny away. I decided not to tell them about the doll. But because my father's mistress was mentally unstable, she didn't really care what kind of trouble she caused me. She became obsessive. She tried to give me a huge amount of Jenny products. A hair salon, a playhouse, 7 more Jenny dolls. Every day she would be waiting for me on the way to school. It was all too much, and her behavior scared me. So I began to avoid her. I changed my route. After a while, she stopped waiting for me on the way to school. And eventually, I went back to walking my usual route to school again. I was happy. But one morning, I saw her again. I didn't feel the usual kindness she had projected before. Something had changed. She was very calm and still. Totally the opposite of how she had been before. Her face was pale, and her smile was now thin. I couldn't really see much of her face, as it was hidden beneath the brim of her big hat and sunglasses. She was carrying 2 huge overnight bags by her side. In one of the bags, a box was poking out, somewhat intentionally. Immediately I recognized the box's shape. I was sure that it was a Jenny doll box. I have to go away. I'm going far away. Please accept this as a parting gift, she said as she offered the box to me. It was a Jenny doll, one that I hadn't seen before. It was a Jenny with long black hair. I hurried along to school. I was so eager to show everyone my rare new Jenny. Honestly, I couldn't wait to start boasting. Some horrid boy snatched the box from me at school. He tore it open and pulled my new rare Jenny's head off. I was mortified. Some of the girls at school managed to get Jenny back from the boy, and they returned her to me. I held her head in my hands, and I saw weed-like clumps of someone's black hair jutting from beneath her chin. It didn't look right. One of the girls who returned the doll pinched a clump of the hair. At first, a huge curled-up wad of hair came out, followed by long, trailing strands. We watched as the hair from Jenny's scalp slowly started to become unraveled. A crowd of children gathered round to get a closer look. Hair from her head was disappearing from the scalp as the girl tugged on the clump of hair. Someone noticed small blood clots attached to the roots of the hair. It was definitely human hair. But this wasn't hair that was cut, but hair that was torn from someone's head. We all stared at the doll. Suddenly, we were all screaming in horror. I felt so scared and so bad inside, I was revolted. I began to cry. Others around me were crying too, even the boy who ripped Jenny's head off. We were inconsolable. The teachers had to cancel our following lesson. The teachers called an assembly, and we were all given a serious talk about that incident. We were reminded of the importance of not receiving gifts from strangers, and to be aware of perverts. I was made to state before my teachers and my parents, who were called in from work, I will not take things from strangers, and I will be careful of perverts. Neither my parents nor teachers would say that the pervert was my father's ex-mistress. It was just a word used to distance us all from my father's personal situation. To this day, whenever I see a Jenny doll, I feel sick and frightened, especially the new ones with black hair.
Eyes of the Forest. It was early spring 2016. I had just turned 24 years old. My friend and I just reached our main spot to camp, Black Canyon Rim campgrounds just outside of Payson, Arizona. We'd usually travel out here 2 or 3 times each year. It has some incredible views and is only a couple hours away from the city. For the most part, this area was pretty secluded. A privately owned convenience store rested a few miles away, with a small town 20 miles before that. The entrance was on a dirt road, directly off the highway, with a campground sign at the start of the road, marking local wildlife, any fire hazards, and general news relevant to camping folk. The pathing is mostly linear, with maybe one fork, spanning several miles. We once traveled down the dirt road to see how far it would take us. One of the paths would take you to another highway entrance, with a ranger's tower halfway there. The other path led to a dead end. An abandoned cabin can be found on this path, a few miles in, mostly hidden off in the distance behind some larger foliage. The snow had mostly cleared up at this point, leaving for crisp air, a slight chill, and fauna becoming active again. We usually spot some wild horses, several deer, and tons of little critters whenever we'd come out this way. It really was the perfect time of year for a relaxing trip to get away from the city for a few days. We got in around 4 PM on a Tuesday. It was late for us, as we usually try to make it out there by noon at latest. This trip was pretty spontaneous. We both had work during the coming weekend and decided to just go for it. The sun was setting fast, and we still hadn't picked up our spot to camp. There were maybe 2 other groups, both families, parked somewhat close to the entrance, only a few hundred yards away from the highway. This time around, we just wanted to get away from humans for a while. Customer service jobs will do the trier. We drove down the dirt road, past our usual spot, and finally picked the perfect area. A small clearing just hanging off the edge of a hill. The whole valley could be seen from this area, with a beautiful sunset. This would have been our main spot from then on, if the next night's incident never happened, that is. We agreed to get a campfire going, and would just avoid building a tent this trip. We didn't have much time to do so anyway, and our car wasn't that uncomfortable. I'd sleep in the back seat, and she'd take the passenger seat. With the window slightly ajar, we'd have a few blankets for each of us, and would fall into the unrivaled slumber. The next day went fairly uneventful. We just decompressed. I had this strange feeling throughout the day though, like we were being watched. There were crunching of leaves just out of sight every few hours, but I figured it was just the local wildlife doing their thing. My friend didn't notice anything unusual, so I didn't dwell on it. Night came, and the feeling still hadn't gone away. My friend must have felt something she didn't vocalize though. She took some of her sleeping pills. She didn't usually need to take them on our camping trips. The nature's ambience was enough to put anyone to sleep, I thought. It was nearing 1 AM. My friend dozed off in the passenger seat, while I attempted to wind down in the back. I leaned against the side window, behind the passenger seat, legs outstretched to the car's back door. The window opposite of me was rolled down slightly, with a cold breeze flowing in. I had been on my phone, scrolling through Facebook or whatever, when I heard something outside. A few crunches of the falling leaves, several paces outside the car. I whispered to my friend, "Did you hear that?" But she was already out. I put my phone down and listened intently for a minute or two. Nothing. It must have been a small animal, curious of the camp. I went back to my phone, scrolling through social media. About 10 minutes had passed when I heard it again. Crunch. Right outside the door. I lowered the phone. My eyes took a moment to adjust from the light of the phone into the deep dark of the woods. As I turned the phone away from me, the backlight illuminated the window above my feet. To this day, I can't get the image out of my head. 2 dirty, scabbed hands held onto the window. The fingers wrapped inside the car. The nails were long, unkempt, and dark. Behind the window, a silhouette of a face was pressed up against it. The breath would create condensation every few seconds. All I could make out were the reflections of those empty, black eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It felt like eternity, the staring contest between me and this thing. Thoughts were repeating incessantly in my head. Why haven't they run away when they saw I noticed them? What were they planning? Is this the face of death? After probably 10 seconds of not doing anything, the hand slowly unclenched the window and receded into the darkness. The condensation on the window dispersed. Another couple seconds passed before I heard the dreaded crunch, 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 melodically fading into the distance. I still just sat there. What in the fuck just happened? Why didn't I do anything? Why am I still not doing anything? With that thought, my body shot into adrenaline. I pounded on my friend's seat, waking her up from her slumber into a dizzy confusion. I unlatched and kicked open the back door and took a moment to scan the area. Whoever they were, whatever it was gone. I scrambled to pick up any important camping supplies we left outside and just crammed everything into the back seat and trunk, periodically looking over my shoulder, listening for those footsteps. I slammed the back door shut, and there they were, a grim reminder of the horror that just happened. 2 handprints imprinted on the window. I quickly wiped them off the window in a panic, a reaction to erase the event, I guess. I jumped into the front seat, started the car, and floored it out of there. My friend, finally coming to, asked me what the hell I'm doing. "We gotta go," I said. "There's someone out there." I didn't see whatever or whoever it was while fleeing the scene. Speeding down the dirt road, my friend insisted I slow down, and I eventually did. We reached the highway and I proceeded to drive 20 or so miles before we reached a Denny's, where my friend asked for us to stop at to eat and explain everything. The nightmares subsided a few months later. My embarrassment continues to this day, for the state of shock I was in at that time. Everybody says you either have fight or flight instinct, and I'm confused whether I have either. I mean, I just sat there and did nothing. I frequently tend to ask myself who was out there. Another camper messing with us? A resident of the abandoned cabin down the road? Or maybe something more paranormal residing in the forest? Watching lone, vulnerable campers as they drift off to dreamland? We'd still go camping there in the years ahead, but never too far from the highway. Whatever it was, I hope that was the last time I've seen of it. TLDR, spooky person stood outside car watching me late at night while camping.
Hello, it's Spooky Boo Rhodes. This is a true story about the strange house we lived in when I was a teen. When I was 14 years old, we lived in a creepy old house in the middle of a suburb township. The town wasn't formally a city yet, but it had its own history of strangeness. By looking at the trim of the windows in the house we lived in, it was built sometime in the late 1800s. In fact, the house was probably an old ranch hand place that was once part of the big house down the street that looked like the house from the show The Big Valley. The house down the street was a huge home with marble pillars and a grand entrance. The house we lived in was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath little house with add-ons. It looked like the original house consisted of just a room, dining room, and 2 bedrooms. There was probably an outhouse when it was built. The walk-in porch looked added on, as did the kitchen and the bathroom. 2 of the bedrooms were on the right of the living room and the dining room. Each had the original trim in each room, just like the adjacent rooms. The kitchen, bathroom, 3rd bedroom, as well as the 2 rectangular rooms that were new and lined the other side of the house, were all added later on in the 20th century. When they added on the side rectangular rooms, they didn't remove the old windows. The old trim windows looked into these rooms, which had newer windows looking into the backyard. The yard sported a 6-foot fence. I tell you this because one night, my sister and her friend were playing a card game at the table. My sister's friend went pale white, got up, went into the kitchen, and grabbed the biggest knife she could find. She sat back down and stared out the window that peered into the other room. When my sister asked her what was wrong, she said she saw a face in the window, a white, faceless face whose features were hard to discern. We looked both in the room and the backyard, but there was no one there. I can't remember if that was the first thing that happened in that house, but there was so much more. Some of the strange things that would happen included dust and feathers falling from nowhere over our heads, just over our heads. We would also get hairline scratches up and down our torsos and arms. It wasn't just one scratch. It was 3 or 4 at a time under our clothes. One minute it wouldn't be there, and the next we would feel a burning sensation on our bodies at different times, and a scratch would happen. My cat was always somewhere else, so it wasn't her. Then one day my brother's friend came over and took a seat in the corner of the living room. From that corner of the living room one can see the bathroom and the back bedroom. The back bedroom, the third room, was a place that no one wanted to sleep in because it was always cold, even in the 90-degree summer weather. It also had a strange hollow or empty feeling to it, as if it was a larger room, but it wasn't. It was tiny. My mom eventually just stored her sewing work in it because nobody wanted to be in there. So when my brother's friend was sitting there waiting for him, he got up and left to go outside. We asked him why, and he said that while he was waiting, he saw a rather large, yellow, fuzzy cat walking on 2 legs like a man walk from the back bedroom into the bathroom, and it gave him the strangest, darkest feeling he had ever felt, and he had to go outside. My room was the biggest and sat next to the living room. I had 2 windows. One was facing the garden and the other looking into the driveway. There was a security light outside so we could see everything just in case the deer decided to eat the garden. My cat was always protective of me. She would bite guys' hands when they tried to touch me and would freak out if I was under the blanket for too long and think I was dying or something. When she became really protective, though, is when she would walk around my bed at night growling and looking out the window. She would sit on my shoulder while I tried to fall asleep and would just stare outside, growling at nothing every single night. The place also attracted strange people. One day while walking home from the store we all frequented, a creepy old man in a Cadillac drove up to me when I was about to cross the street to get to my house and asked if I would spend the evening with him for $50. I yelled at him and ran down a different street so he didn't know which house I lived in. I believe I was about 13 at the time. About a year later, coming home from school on the bus, we noticed a man in his 30s walking down the old highway. I got off the bus and went home, and he must have seen me because not more than 20 minutes later there was a knock at my door. It was that man. He said he had broken down up the road and needed to use a phone. Since my sister and I shared the house phone, it had a 20-foot cord on it, and I was able to put it on the walk-in porch for him to use, then shut the door. A few minutes later, he was standing behind me in the kitchen, telling me I had to do what he said, because he had a knife at my back. I was an obnoxious teen back then, and instead of doing what he said, I felt behind my back. It was his finger. I screamed at him out of my house as he called me a whore for inviting him in and not doing anything with him. I was about 14 when this happened. I found out later that area was a farming area and there were people of all races who were farm workers who were treated poorly. There was a stream running about a quarter mile from where my room sat, probably right after the big house I talked about earlier. People would walk from the stream and camp out for farm work in the past. Some supposedly died there, but since there were migrants from all areas, no one kept track of their names. I have tried to find out more history about this house, but I haven't found any records of death or births or anything inside the house. I wonder if those who traveled the stream were the ones who haunt the little place.
This story takes place when I was a teenager. Back then, I lived with my parents in a part of South Dakota that had a lot of wilderness, and I was one to always take advantage of the woods in the area. I was all about heading out onto the trails in the woods to see what I could find out there, and I loved to spend my weekends hiking and finding new areas. We lived near a small pond that was right by a small section of woods that is by a cave system. I spent way too many hours of my teen years in that cave system, and I honestly love to spend my entire days out in the wild, just taking in the sights and sounds. That said, nothing is perfect, and there were a few close calls I had when I was young, and thought I was invincible. I once fell from a pretty high ledge when I was 13 and broke my arm. And thankfully that was all I broke, because I could have died. No, that's not the scary story, just a point of note that tells you who I am as a person. A risk taker, an idiot, essentially. I used to go out and do pretty much whatever to whenever, and then head home and do it all again the next day. Like I said, nothing is perfect, and I can recall 2 specific stories that made me feel like maybe spending all my time out there in the wilderness, where no one knew where I was, maybe that wasn't such a great idea in the end. The first incident happened during one summer, where there was a good amount of foot traffic in the area. Some years there would be more tourism than others. We weren't really a tourism city, but some people that were nature buffs would stop in the area for the scenery. Like I said, this year was one when we had more people in the area. On this day in particular, I wanted to go down to the pond and just watch the animals down the way. I did as I always did. Got up, got dressed, and ate. Then headed out and hit the path as early as I could. One thing to note, I had gone this exact same route the day before, and nothing was out of place. About a quarter of a mile into the path, I ran into the body of an animal. That may be gross to most people, but living in nature kind of desensitizes you to animal death. There are so many predators out there, bears, wolves, etc., that you kind of just accept when you see a carcass. And you put yourself in a bit of a defensive mentality that there might be a predator nearby. Now, this kill was fairly fresh, so that as well puts you in a position where you watch your surroundings even more. The main thing I found to be odd about the carcass was the head was missing. Again, a bit strange, but nothing too crazy. Animals do weird things. I continue down the way and make my way toward the pond, when I see something that legitimately makes me sick to my stomach. Down by the water, I see what looks like a shovel, or spear, or whatever, sticking in the ground near the water's edge, and on the end of the stick that's pointed up is the head of an animal. I'm assuming it's the head of the one I found down the trail, as it's a deer, and it also looked rather fresh. This alone was enough to scare the hell out of me. As I got closer, I saw that there was a pile of Polaroids scattered around the ground near where the shovel was. I hesitantly stepped forward to look at the pictures, and they were just as sick as you might think. The pictures were basically each part of the timeline of how the people that killed this deer did so, and then beheaded it. There were about 15 pictures total, and they were each taken at different points. There were 2 people, but they were wearing masks and dark clothing. Like I said, this path was clear the afternoon prior, which meant whoever did this did so in the middle of the night. I'm sure they were doing it to be edgy, but it was absolutely disgusting. I ended up heading home and calling the police. They came and took the evidence, which was pretty much just the pictures and the shovel, and they had Park Service to come out to clean up the scene. I'm pretty sure they never actually caught anyone, which leads more to the possibility of it being a tourist that did it. The other story I have is one that's less straightforward and more on the probability side. Like I said, there was a cave system that was down by the pond, and it was a fairly large cave. I spent many days in my summers checking it out, and I'm certain that I never found every vein that it actually had, mostly because I didn't really try. And this situation proved that was the right way to do things. On this particular day, a friend of mine and I had decided that we would go through a part of the cave that I hadn't yet explored. This was an idea that he had that I honestly wish he hadn't. We got to the cave and started to explore. Pretty much nothing out of place, until we got back to the far left and into a vein that we'd never traveled. Back in the rear vein, there was a small pocket that pretty much looked the size to be of a small room. Inside this pocket, there was what looked like a makeshift bed made out of a sleeping bag and some clothing. There were posters that were basically taped to the walls of the cave in a sloppy manner. There were a handful of books that were scattered around. While this is creepy, the part that made it worse was that there was also a lantern laying on the ground that was still lit, which told me that whoever was staying in the cave wasn't too far away. Now you may think that's not that bad, it's just a homeless person making the most out of what was available. The problem in this lies with the fact that we lived near a federal prison, and there had been escaped inmates in the past. And around the time we found this, there was an inmate that had gotten through the fence and hadn't yet been found. Odds are what we found was the camp where an escaped inmate was hiding out. Of course, at the time as a kid, I didn't realize this. We just bolted out of the cave and laughed about it, and we never went back to the cave, or at least never deep into it. I don't live in South Dakota anymore, but if I did, I can promise you that I'd probably still be out there every weekend, just like back then.
We were coming back from our trip to Niagara Falls, being disappointed by the journey, as most of the attractions were closed due to quarantine at the time. As we drove, we were considering what we could do with the many hours we still had before we'd be expected to return home. As we made suggestions, they were instantly shot down as none of them sounded very good. At one point, I'd gotten frustrated to the point where I half-heartedly joked, "Fuck it, wanna play a board game?" This got a laugh from my two friends in the car. "What board game?" Noah asked, humoring me. "I'll kick your ass in Monopoly." This led to the giant snickering. "Bitch, please, I'm a businessman." I rolled my eyes. Sure you are." "Speaking of board games," Gavin interrupted, "want to try a Ouija board?" "I mean, sure. Do you have one?" "No, but we can always go to the hag shop." "Hag shop?" I asked. "Yeah, it's supposed to be a gemstone place or something, but she sells other weird mystic shit too, so everyone calls it the hag shop." "Oh, didn't know we had one of those here. Is it open?" "I don't know. Might be closed because of lockdown, but we can always check." As we suggested it, Noah laughed again with a smug look on his face. "Drive to Toys R Us," he said. I gave him a quizzical look. "Toys R Us? I shit you not. They sell them there." "Really?" Gavin asked. "Alright, let's see," he said before making a turn towards the nearest store. As we drove, I read online about the do's and don'ts of using a Ouija board to get a better idea of what to do when the time comes. Once there, we first headed to the dollar store to grab some things we needed. Flashlights, snacks, small candles to add some ambience, and a box of salt just in case. Hey, you never know. After checking out, we headed into the Toys R Us to purchase the board. As we entered, we immediately went into the board game section to look for the item in question. "Are you sure they sell them here, Noah? I don't see shit." A look of genuine surprise came upon the face of the usually confident Noah. "They don't? I'm gonna ask the staff. They might just have it in the back." After finding one of the workers and asking about it, they led us to the same aisle we were at before kneeling down in front of the Monopoly packs. The woman then moved them to the side, revealing that behind them was a board game with the words, "Hasbro Ouija, fun for the whole family, living or dead." There was a single board game left. I laughed to myself. This is playing out like the beginning of a horror movie, I mused. Like, at the back of the store, hidden behind another game, there's only one left. Sounds like the start of a scary movie to me. After purchasing the board, we set off on the road again to find a location. "So, where are we gonna do this?" I asked. After a long silence, Gavin responded with, "I don't know. Are there any haunted places or anything where we can do it?" A long silence came between us as we pondered it. "Fuck it," Gavin said. "We'll just do it at the bridge. A lot of people died there, so there's bound to be someone who's talkative." "Do you really think it's a good idea to bring a Ouija board under the bridge in an open area? Like, there's no way someone isn't gonna notice." After thinking a bit more, we decided to look around the area of the bridge, due to a lot of houses being abandoned. Was it illegal? Well, technically yes, but as long as we didn't get caught, it'd be fine. After driving for a few minutes, we decided to get out of the car and take a closer look at the houses to see if any could be open. After finding a window in a small shack, we decided to set up there. After opening the box, we lit the tea lights we had brought from the dollar store around the room in a circle and placed the board in the center. I scrolled through my phone, worrying what to do while Noah read the box. "Okay," I said. "You two have to hold the key and close your eyes. I'll be here to write down the answers." "Hey, who made you leader here?" Gavin asked. "I did. What you gonna do about it, bitch?" I replied jokingly. After he joked about revenge, we set up the board. He and Noah both placed their hands on the pallet, as I instructed, and then told them to close their eyes. As they did, I waited a few moments before asking, "Are there any spirits here that wish to talk?" The silence that followed was almost oppressing. "Well," Gavin said, "I guess it isn't real after all." But just as he said that, the universe seemed to have proved him wrong as the palette moved to the yes. "Really, Noah? You're gonna pretend it wasn't you?" The pale-skinned 6-footer stared at him with seriousness and commanded, "Close your eyes, we're still playing," before closing his own eyes again. "Ask another question," he told me. I scrolled through my phone, a bit nervous, looking for questions to ask the ghost. Apparently, asking a ghost's birthday is a safe question, When were you born? I asked nervously. The platelet slowly moved to the letters T-O-D-A-Y. After writing it down, I read it out as today. Today's your birthday? I asked. The key moved to the yes on the board. Well, happy birthday, I guess? What do you want as a present? I nervously joked. Looking back, probably a dumb thing to ask, but I use humor as a coping mechanism, and I was feeling pretty anxious about the whole thing. But it wasn't until the spirit answered that turned that feeling of anxiousness into dread. Y-O-U, it spelled out. I felt a pit in my stomach as I read it out. Gavin opened his eyes again and said, "What the fuck? No, fuck this." I can tell he was starting to panic. Noah, seeing this, preemptively clamped his hands onto Gavin so neither of them would let go of the pallet. Sorry, no, we won't be able to give you that as a gift, I managed to get out before telling the ghost goodbye. After they moved the pallet to the goodbye sign on the board, Noah and Gavin held it there. We all sat there for a moment frozen, waiting to see if anything else happened. To our relief, there wasn't. With an exhale, we put the board away. "So," I said, "I have the salt we brought in the car. Want to sprinkle it on ourselves and never speak of this again?" "Yep."
The Woods of Somerset, Kentucky. By you/Scary Stormy. Growing up in a rural backwoods town, you would never expect anything horrible to happen. Somerset was relatively small and a quiet town. Plenty of beautiful and tranquil sights to see in the woods. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. There always seemed to be something hidden within the forest. My name is Stormy. I've posted previously relenting some of my own, as well as my friends' encounters with the paranormal while we lived in the backwoods town. But today, I will recount a very dark stain on Somerset. One that, unfortunately, to this day, almost 12 years later, still is yet to be solved. And to date, is one of the most gruesome homicides in Somerset's history. We begin this story with a friend named Logan. Logan was a lot younger than the rest of us, and only really hung out with me and my friend Shelley. We used to hang out at Shelley's and take care of horses, hike, and ride four-wheelers through the woods. This was a couple of years before the incidents of my previous stories, so my perspective on the woods hadn't been completely tainted by whatever creatures lied dormant within them. Logan, as most kids were, pretty annoying. Nothing too bad, always obnoxious, loud, and would tell some really gross jokes. But as a teenager, it was something just a bit too much to be around. But he was a family friend of Shelley's, so we were kind of stuck with him. This is just to let it be known that sometimes we weren't really fond of him being around. But still, he didn't deserve the trauma that he went through that day in the woods. One day, Shelley and I were hanging out at her place playing Majora's Mask for the umpteenth time when her phone rang. Shelley answered it, and after a few moments of silence, I look over to see her face has gone white. I heard her mutter something along the lines of, "Yeah, that's fine. You can come here." The whole time I'm impatiently mouthing, "What's up? What happened?" Eventually, Shelley hung up, and after about a half hour, we got a knock on the door. And it's Logan. His face was pale, like he had been throwing up or something, but it was frozen on this expression of shock. We let him in and went to Shelley's room while Logan's mom talked to Shelley's. We just sat there in silence for what felt like an hour until I finally asked what happened. Shelley punched me and whispered, "Dude!" Then Logan looked up to me and began his story. The following account is from Logan's perspective. Dad and I were riding the trails like we usually do out in the woods behind our house. We were maybe 20 minutes in the ride when we came across a trail by the creek. Dad told me to turn off so we could go mudding. I followed him and we went off onto the creek trail. We were on for about a minute before we came across a flat spot that looked like it might have been a campsite. Once we reached this section of the woods, I noticed an awful smell. Assuming it was just a dead animal, we went to drive by it, and just as we reached the edge of the site, I hit a bump. Something that shifted the four-wheeler, and as that happened, I noticed a large metal barrel near the center of the site. My dad kept driving by it, and I was ready to continue on the path, but I was too curious. It had scorch marks up at the top, so someone used it as a fire pit. So I drove over to the barrel. As I got closer, I noticed the stench got even worse. And then I looked inside. As I looked at the contents of the barrel, I saw it was a body. Headless, burned and stuffed into the barrel. At this point in Logan's retelling of his story, he became quiet again. He was crying and stopped. Couldn't continue. I didn't want to pry anymore, so we comforted him as best as we could. Hearing news reports later, we found out that the body was a local man. Logan and his dad had come across the dump site of his body. The police report read, on November 9th, 2009, was last seen leaving work at 3:30 p.m. from Eagle Hardwood, just north of Somerset. When he didn't return home, family members became concerned and reported him missing. Later in the evening, Silver Dodge Dakota was found burning near the former Outdoorsman's Club's pond behind Eagle Hardwood. On November 28, 2009, a burned body was located in a remote area off of. His death has been ruled a homicide. It's been almost 12 years since he was murdered. As stated earlier, police were never able to solve the case, and to date, the public still doesn't know who committed this horrible act or why it happened. But one thing is for sure. There are sometimes more terrifying things than monsters in the woods of Somerset, Kentucky.
My mom's boyfriend tried to kidnap me. Written and narrated by Fearsome Hero. Character voiced by Seraphine the Midnight Bard. It was during the mid-90s, and I was roughly 6 years old, so the details are a little fuzzy. About 2 years after my parents divorced, my mom started dating the Schwann's delivery man. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Schwann's sells frozen food from special freezer trucks. basically going door to door. For this story, I'll call the boyfriend Bob. At the time of this incident, my mom had dated Bob for about 8 or 9 months. My mom often took care of his toddler-aged daughter while he was at work. I was an anxious child, especially after going through the stress of my parents fighting and my dad moving out, and something felt wrong about Bob. On the day it happened, we spent most of the morning running errands. Afterwards, my mom brought us to McDonald's for lunch. When we returned home, there were police surrounding our house. A few cars were parked on the street in front, and I believe one was even in our driveway. The next few things are fuzzy. I remember my mom telling me a family friend was coming to get me. She told me to sit on the front steps and wait for him. I vividly recall my mom being handcuffed and walked to the police car. Shortly after, one of the police officers asked me if I was all right. I was so mad, I literally growled at him. The next part I remember very clearly. I was sitting on the front porch, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't understand what was happening, and I feared my mom was going away for a long time. Most of the cops left shortly after they took my mom, and those still around didn't seem to be paying close attention to me. I heard someone say my name. I looked up to see Bob beckoning for me to come to his truck and get in. I shook my head. His face dropped. His aggressive tone and tense body language told me that if I didn't get in his truck, he would make me. He pointed his finger at me, narrowing his eyes, while moving his finger in the direction of his truck. Through gritted teeth, he said,
"Get in now."
I again shook my head, crying out, "No." This angered him. He proceeded to stomp his foot and began to power walk straight in my direction. He suddenly stopped, turned on a dime, sprinted and jumped back into his truck, speeding away. It was then I noticed my mom's friend coming up to me from the opposite side of the yard. He helped me gather some things and brought me to his house. I took comfort in his daughters, who were my best friends. Fortunately, my mom was only kept overnight, and I never saw Bob again. I later found out that Bob had called the police claiming my mom had kidnapped his daughter. As it turns out, my gut feelings were correct. There was a lot going on that my mom hid from me, namely a nasty custody battle between Bob and his ex-wife, plus a large sum of child support he owed. Although I'm not sure what he had hoped to accomplish in his stunt, there were still cops around, so I'm not sure how he thought he was gonna get away with it. Maybe he was crazy. Anyways, the gravity of the situation hadn't dawned on me until my early 20s. It's scary to think what would have happened if I had gotten into his truck. It's likely I would have experienced something far worse than death.
I live in a small rural community in the eastern US. It's a nice little town. Small town life isn't as dull and uneventful as people think, especially since everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. I have a lot of stories to share, but since this one just happened, I'll start here. Because it's still very recent, and the investigation is still ongoing, I have to be vague with some details. I'm single and I live alone. I've moved twice, but that's a story for another time. However, it's relevant to this story for multiple reasons. The first reason being that I have a dog for the sake of protection. The second reason being the location of my home, which is literally down the street from the fire department and a couple blocks from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park their road equipment. and empty garbage trucks at night and on weekends. Oddly, it doesn't have a security camera. Small town life, I suppose. My house sits on a hill with a good view of that side of the street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield on the property next to me, most people on the street below wouldn't notice me in the backyard unless they were actively looking. However, I can see the street clearly. This incident happened Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day event with a community barbecue, music, fireworks, etc. I didn't attend because it's just not my thing. Plus, I have a dog, and the sound of fireworks could be traumatizing for her. Before the big show, I took my dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight, but the entire neighborhood was pretty quiet. So when an unfamiliar white pickup truck drove slowly down the street, I noticed. It must have turned around at the end of the street, because I saw it again, moving in the opposite direction, only about 20 seconds later. This time, it turned into the parking lot of the road department. Now, people have been known to toss things into the empty garbage trucks, usually at night to avoid getting caught, because they don't want to, or are unable to make the trip to the landfill themselves. The driver was a somewhat stocky guy of an average height. He took 3 black trash bags from the back of his truck and tossed them one by one into the hopper of the garbage truck. I swear I'm not one of those meddling rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and that their neighbors are up to no good. But something about this didn't sit right with me. Normally, when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting it because it's relatively harmless. But this time, I had a gut feeling, so I called the police. A few minutes later, an officer arrived, and I crossed the street to meet him. I gave him a description of the events. He found the bags, and they took photos. The bags were tied in a knot at the top, and it took him a minute to untie one, but eventually, he got it open. He looked inside for a few seconds, then twisted it closed and took a few steps back. Shit, it's a body. I felt sick. I could tell he felt sick too. I saw him grow pale. His hand was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking when he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused and even asked him to repeat it. Within 10 minutes, the county sheriff was on scene. Even he looked sick seeing the contents of the bag. The coroner arrived about 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked me back to my house, along with another one who arrived at the same time as the coroner. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the events initially, I now showed them the video on a larger screen. My security camera caught footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately not a clear view of the license plate, or of the man tossing the bags out of frame. They requested the footage, as well as a copy of the files from the past week to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own camera this week. Because this is still fresh, I don't know many more details. I know the body was, quote-unquote, in pieces, but I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, the cause of death, any of that. When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me feel physically ill. To think he'd clearly scouted the area for a dump site, that it may not have been the first time this had happened, that this could happen again. If I hadn't called it in, if I hadn't been in the backyard at that exact moment, or if I'd ignored that gut feeling, the victim would have never been found. In fact, there's a possibility it might just happen again to another poor soul. I hope it's not me. Dear God, please don't let it be me.
The thing about this story is I had actually forgotten about it for a long time, until my mom brought it up one day,
when we were talking about taking a family vacation to the Lake of the Ozarks sometime. She pretty much just said, "Speaking of the Ozarks, do you remember when blank happened?" The memory hit me like a truck, and I was like, well, I do now. When I was about 9 years old, me and my mom spent a lot of time at her then boyfriend's lake house in the Lake of the Ozarks. I can't say exactly where we were, but it was definitely in the Missouri region. If I had to guess, probably the Osage Beach area. We were living in Lee's Summit, Missouri at the time, and I know that the drive to the lake house was about 2 hours. The lake sat off the edge of a winding gravel road that wasn't too heavily traveled, and on one side of the road was a tree line of the woods. During the day, I wasn't scared of the woods, except for the times that I ran across copperheads or huge spiders. But at night, forget it. I hated nighttime when we were at the lake. The Ozarks, at least where we were, it was very thick with forest, so it would get wicked dark at night. I don't even like stepping out of the front porch because the woods were just right there. It felt like the woods were alive, just staring me down. What didn't help my fear were all the stories my mom's boyfriend and his family told us about weird creatures and Bigfoot sightings in that particular area. Being a kid, I believed in everything, and hearing grown adults give cadence to stories they had heard and tell their own personal accounts of seeing Bigfoot or something else definitely made me buy into the possibility that unusual creatures lurked in the Ozarks. My mom's boyfriend Arthur was an avid fisherman, and one of our favorite things to do was to get in the speedboat at night and cruise over to the cove where he set up the fishing lines and check to see if any fish were on them. I loved being on the boat at night because the whole experience was just great. The air was always nice and cool, and you could see the moon and the stars above as well. Arthur would play music on the radio, and the water was calm, unlike during the day. But again, I did not like the woods. So when we would get to the cove, I'd literally bury my face into my mom's arm, and just not even look anywhere until we were back on the main channel of the lake. The best way I could describe the cove is like a cul-de-sac, just an area of lake surrounded by a tree line, which was insanely dark at night. Coasting into that cove felt like being swallowed by the woods. It was total darkness. As much as I hated that part of our nightly boat rides, there was no way I was going to stay home alone either. I was pretty much a chicken through and through. Then came the night everything changed. We had been to the same cove multiple times, day and night. Never had any trouble with other lake goers, fishermen, or wildlife. But this night was different. I remember Arthur switching the boat engine off as we neared the cove just enough so that we could let the boat coast towards the tree line. Normally, a spot like this in the Ozarks is hollering with bullfrogs, bugs, etc. But that is one of the first things that made me and my mom feel like something was off. It was dead quiet. We couldn't hear anything. I remember my mom actually gesturing at me to come sit closer to her, and I gladly obliged. My mom said to Arthur, "Wow, it's pretty quiet, right?" Arthur didn't seem bothered by the weird silence at all. He got out his big flashlight and said something like, "Yeah, a little." He was all about checking to see if any catfish were on his lines, so he wasn't really paying much attention to anything else. This is probably important to mention. Arthur was no Clint Eastwood by any means, but he also didn't scare easily. He was a hunter, fisherman, a man's man. He was pretty tough and could handle himself. He had spent so much time in the Ozarks, there wasn't much that he hadn't encountered. But that night was the first time I ever seen fear in a grown man's eyes. We weren't quite where we needed to be at the tree line. The boat was still drifting towards the spot where the lines were. And then, we all heard a low, deep growl. Me and my mom froze. Arthur paused for a second and started shining his flashlight around, looking for what might have made that growl. I was clinging to my mom, and she was holding me pretty tightly too. I remember my whole body just tingling with fear and adrenaline as we watched Arthur's light go back and forth on the trees, but we didn't see anything. My mom said really soft, "Art, what the hell was that?" Immediately after my mom said that, the loudest, absolutely most chilling roar blasted out of nowhere. It's giving me the chills just remembering it right now. Arthur dropped the flashlight. My mom, still holding on to me, dropped us down to the floor of the boat and started yelling, "Art, go! Start the boat, just go!" I remember craning my head up and seeing Arthur grabbing onto the steering wheel, but he didn't start the boat. He was literally frozen, just staring at the trees. Whatever was in the trees was pissed that we were there. I remember hearing really loud splashes near the boat, and it turns out whatever the thing was throwing big rocks at us, all the while it was still bellowing. I honestly don't know what to compare the roaring to. It wasn't a bear, a big cat, and it definitely wasn't a wolf. I remember hearing the loud bang of a rock hitting the boat and my mom screaming, "Arthur, get us out of here!" The part I'll never forget is seeing whatever was roaring at us from behind the trees, shaking the trees like they were made of rubber. At first, it sounded like something was pounding and hitting the trees. Then the top of the trees were violently being whipped around side to side. These were not frail or dead trees. These were big, healthy trees that I don't think should have been able to be shaken like that. What was even scarier was it seemed like whatever was there started running parallel to the tree line, going back and forth slamming and shaking the trees. It looked really similar to the scene of the Lost World Jurassic Park, when two of the characters are up in the protective tree lift, watching the treetops shake and tumble as the T-Rexes pass through the jungle. The sound of the roaring in trees was almost deafening. I really thought we were possibly going to die. That's when my mom all but forced me down flat on the floor and laid herself over me, sort of shielding me. She later told me that she felt the same way I did, that seeing those trees flailing like that did not look right, and that whatever was doing it was big and damn strong. She said it was like her body sensed true danger and told her to protect your child. As I'm laying on the floor, I'm hearing the creature frantically roaring, the tree shaking, and my mom yelling hysterically. I remember almost feeling numb, like the fear had completely numbed my body. Then I remembered feeling the strong vibration of the engine through the floor, and I could feel the boat turning. I remember hearing the trees suddenly stop shaking and the angry roaring got immediately louder, like the creature came down closer to the tree line. Turns out, that's exactly what happened. My mom confirmed it for me later on, which explains why I heard her scream. "Arthur, go!" Mom said. Neither she nor Arthur got a good look at whatever that thing was, except for the very last second as the boat sped away from the tree line. They both saw a pair of shiny yellow eyes reflecting in the dark. I actually don't remember the boat ride back to the lake house. The very next thing I remember is sitting on the couch, practically in my mom's lap, while Arthur was pacing around on the phone with one of his friends. I was so freaked out by what had happened, I only remember pieces of what my mom and Arthur were saying. Arthur was saying to his friend, "In my cove, something evil is frickin' out there." I distinctly remember seeing him go upstairs, then come back down with his shotgun, and my mom saying, "Don't you dare go back there. I swear to God, Arthur." I remember looking at his face. His eyes looked wet, like he had been trying not to cry. And the way he was talking to his friend, he was frantic. It was really strange to see him like that. After that, I don't remember anything else, really. My mom told me Arthur actually rounded up some of his friends, told them to bring their firearms, and went back to the cove with the intent to kill whatever was threatening us. She said that he never did see or hear anything. They stayed for a good while waiting for it to show, but it never did. I think I forgot about this event because my brain made me forget. When my mom jogged my memory, it all came flooding back. It felt like reliving the past trauma. Me and my mom have speculated so many times about what it may have been, and I've talked about it with my husband and friends too. My mother believes to her core it was a Bigfoot. My husband just thinks it's a really big, really territorial bear, and I still haven't made up my mind. From the research I've done before, bears aren't common in the Ozarks, and I can't imagine a bear picking up rocks and throwing them. I have watched dozens of Bigfoot documentaries, but I don't know if I believe in Bigfoot as an adult. Before this incident, I was very open to the possibility of such creatures existing, but even after such a traumatic experience, I can't draw to a conclusion. I definitely believe that it was not a native Ozark animal, just the sheer power of its roar, and the ability to manipulate trees like that makes it difficult to imagine a bear or mountain lion doing such things. Whatever it was, I don't care to go back and find out.
This is just a few stories from a house I used to live in as a kid. And all of them are from when I was about 10. When I was 10, we lived in this big house. A lot of things have happened in this house. I remember one time my sister and I were playing outside, and we saw a dead cat, and that same night, I saw that exact dead cat on the end of my bed laying there. I was so freaked out. I went to touch it because I didn't know if it was real, or if I was going crazy. I'm pretty sure the house we lived in was haunted. I used to wake up most nights downstairs on the couch with the TV on, but it was always on static. I never knew how I got down there. I would freeze up every time I woke up downstairs. I would get so scared and confused as to how I got down there. I always woke up around 3 in the morning. Sometimes if I fell asleep downstairs, I wake up upstairs. I will ask my mom if she took me upstairs. She will always say no. So this story is the one that freaked me out the most when I was a kid. One night I was having trouble sleeping, and it was pretty late. I always used to sleep with the door open. I was laying down facing the door, and my dresser was next to my bed, so I couldn't exactly see the door, but I kept hearing someone walking around upstairs. My sister and I used to scare each other because we thought it was funny, so I thought it was her walking in and out of my room. I was getting annoyed because I was really having trouble sleeping, so I yelled at her to stop. I thought she was hiding by my dresser, and she wasn't saying anything. I got up to tell her to go away. She wasn't there. I was getting scared at this point. I lay back down and kept hearing someone walk in my room and go by my dresser. I got up again to see if anyone was there, and I kept thinking it was my sister, but again, there was no one. I went to my sister's room to see if she was screwing with me, but she was dead asleep. Everyone in the house was. I went back to my room to lay down, and I was super scared, but managed to almost fall asleep. That's when I heard someone walk into my room. But this time, it sounded like they were walking towards my bed. At this point, I was too frozen with fear to open my eyes, but I was awake. I was sweating and so scared. That's when I heard someone say my name loud and clear. and then felt someone touch my hand. I freaked out. I opened my eyes and laid up against the wall with the blanket over my head. Fell asleep, and ever since then, I haven't been able to forget that night.
This story took place back when I was in college. I had a lot of friends that liked to party, and while I wasn't the type that liked to drink or do stupid things, I was the type to make sure that my friends got to and from their party responsibly. Basically, I was their designated driver. I would drive them to the parties, sit around and drink soda until they were drunk off their back ends, and then drive them back home. It may sound like an incredibly boring way to spend your college years, but I honestly had a lot of fun with it. I'm not an incredibly social person myself, so just kind of sitting around and watching people make themselves look like idiots, well, that was my idea of a fun Friday night. Now, this situation occurred at one party that was particularly rowdy, and had a lot of people that I didn't know, which usually happened when the parties were off campus. I was there, and sitting in the corner with my Dr. Pepper, and talking with another girl that was completely trashed. She and I were having a conversation about my education, something that she seemed way more interested in than she should have been, when one of my friends comes over to me and asks if I can take one of his friends home, and was insistent that it was just down the road. I usually don't play designated driver with people that I don't personally know, but I also didn't want this guy struggling to get home if he was drunk and needed a ride. I reluctantly agreed, and said that as long as my friend was vouching for him, and that it wasn't too far from the party, I would take him home. I got up and followed him out to the front door, and he shouted to some guy named Greg, telling him that I would take him home. They said their drunken goodbyes, and I walked over to my car, which, I should add, was a late 90s Dodge Caravan. After they were done talking and telling each other how much they were going to miss each other, Greg walked over and smiled at me, asking if this was the car. I told him that this was the one, and I got in the driver's seat. He, for some reason, opened the sliding door and hopped into one of the back seats. I was curious, but if there's one thing you don't ask a drunk person that you're taking home, it's why they choose to do strange and mundane things. He gets buckled in, and I pull onto the road, and then I ask him where he's headed. He tells me an address that's literally 5 blocks down the way, just a straight shot, and only a few minutes away. As drunk people often do, he starts rambling about random things. He tells me that his name was Gregory, and that he was named after his grandfather. He tells me about a dog he used to have as a child named Bucky, and how much he missed him. He then tells me about his sister, and how she runs a beauty parlor in New Mexico, and how he and his mother never really got along. This guy is seriously telling me his entire life story within the span of 1.5 miles. I pull up to where he wanted to go, and I let him know that we are at his house, just in case he didn't realize it. And he just kind of sits there and stares at nothing. After a few seconds of really awkward silence, he literally starts bawling. Out of nowhere, he tells me that he's sorry. I have no idea why he's sorry, and I tell him he doesn't need to be. After sobbing for a few moments, he tells me that I was the nicest person he'd met, and that he was going to miss all of this. Once again, I'm just sitting here silently, and he's telling me how much he's going to miss everything out here. And then he tells me why he's going to miss it. He drops in with, "I'm about to go to prison for a really long time." I just kind of sat there and nodded. He, of course, continues, I made a mistake, and I accidentally assaulted my ex-girlfriend, so I have to go to court tomorrow, and I'm going to go away for a long time. As he finished telling me about what he did to her, he starts to chuckle, and then stare at me in the rearview mirror. He smiles and tells me that I kind of remind him of his ex, and how much he hated her. After a few more moments of awkward silence, he shrugs and tells me he appreciated the ride, and that we should go get lunch when he gets out of prison. I just agreed and nodded along until he got out and got to his door. As soon as he entered his house, I let out a huge sigh of relief. The entire time he was staring at me and telling me about what he'd done, I felt like I was holding my breath. And this was the last time that I gave anyone a ride that wasn't one of my immediate friends, and I hope I literally never ever meet Gregory again.
Saved by the property manager. Let me preface this by saying I'm not the most observant human in the world. I'm usually in my own little world and busy planning the rest of my day before I have a chance to enjoy the moment I am currently in. I am actively working on this because I am aware it makes me an easy target. Not to mention it makes enjoying life to its fullest impossible. Anywho, I don't live in the best part of town. Certainly not the worst, but we do have our share of shootings, stabbings, and drug-related issues. That said, I still feel pretty safe in my apartment complex. We are in a little nook of a main road, and all of us neighbors know each other and watch out for each other. To be honest, we are a pretty little good community. A couple of weeks ago, I came home from work, and as I pulled into a parking space, a woman who I had never seen approached my car. I'm pretty caught off guard. I don't like people approaching me. Hell, I don't particularly like people and talking to people. She started saying she needed a ride, that she needed to go to a storage unit just down the road. At this point, my mind is racing, trying to even think of a storage unit nearby. I'm kinda doing the thing my poor deaf grandmom does, where she smiles and nods while this girl is talking to me about needing to take stuff to her storage unit, and that she is also pregnant. But I have no clue who the hell she is. I just got home. I have to take my dog out, and I have things that I need to do. That is literally all that is going through my head. Because I had my afternoon planned out. Now this lady is talking to me and stressing me out. I have a hard time telling people no because I'm terrified of disappointing them. Next thing I know, a loud, deep voice snaps me for my mini internal freak out. You doing alright, Haley? Thank God our property manager had been watching. He saw that I was looking uncomfortable. So he informed the lady that she and her friends, who I had not even noticed were hiding between buildings near the main entrance, needed to leave immediately. So I wonder, what would have happened had I let this girl in my car? Would it have been a totally normal good deed? Or would I have gotten carjacked and ended up getting myself killed? I don't know. But the fact that I didn't pay attention in my own backyard and not notice that there was a group of 5 people who didn't belong and just blending in gives me the willies. So, moral of the story, I need to pay better attention and get worked up over the right things.
After a few major stories popped up on Let's Not Meet that sparked mine and my sister's interest in the sub, she asked me to post about this creepy encounter that I and my family experienced between Halloween 2017 and August 2018. Around 9 p.m. in mid-August, somebody came to our home and rang the doorbell. I ignored it at first because I try not answering for solicitors, but this person knocked on the door, so I went to see who it was. I was hesitant to answer the door, but at the time of the incident, our parents were having their basement finished, and workers were obnoxiously notorious for working until 9 p.m. and leaving their tools in the basement and then showing up late in the day to retrieve them, so it wasn't completely abnormal to have people show up around this time of day. Upon answering the door, a man was standing there, seemingly somewhat standoffish, which threw me off. He wasn't particularly big or scary. He was around 5'7", wearing a jacket, jeans, and baseball cap, but he did not look like any of the basement workers I had seen entering or exiting the house during this time. He then said hi and proceeded to ask if I knew a Manny O'Brien. I originally thought he was saying Manny or Brian, two separate names. I told him that I didn't know anyone by those names and they did not live here. He then repeated the question. He then asked, "Do you know the name of your neighbors? Do you know his name?" and pointed to the house just east of ours. This really stood out to me as suspicious for a couple of reasons. One, because I work in the field of domestic violence, so creepy stalker behaviors are something that I'm constantly analyzing, which was my initial reaction given this weirdness of the interaction. And two, even if he was legit, who comes looking for their buddies at 9 p.m. on a weekday, also not knowing where they live? After a second, I said that I didn't know the neighbors well, but the house he pointed at was owned by someone not named Manny O'Brien. Then he asked about the neighbors to the west of us, and I said that I was unsure of their names. He then asked if I was sure that I didn't know someone who worked for XYZ company, and then proceeded to say that he met a Manny O'Brien on Halloween 2017 and he wanted to connect with him again. That statement wasn't sitting right with me as I was feeling all sorts of deja vu. I said that I couldn't help him and maybe he should ask the neighbors since nobody by that name lives at this address. He then thanked me and walked away. After he left, I went and sit at the kitchen table and just pondered about this dude at the door and why it wasn't sitting right with me. After a few minutes of thinking, it clicked in my head that someone approached our house asking, "Do you know the name of your neighbors?" It actually occurred on Halloween night of 2017. Flashing back to that Halloween, I was trading off answering the door with my mother and my youngest sister Kate. In the middle of the trick-or-treater knocks was a man who approached our home and knocked on our door and proceeded to ask, "Do you know the name of your neighbors?" and was trying to get basic info. I found this odd at the time, and we were really tripped out by the fact that this random man was inquiring about the name of our neighbors on Halloween. He also approached the door by himself, so we found it even weirder that this person that we had never seen before approached our front door alone on a night that adults are usually with their children. I rationally can't 100% confirm that this was the same man, as I don't have any photo evidence or anything like that, but I would say I'm 90% confident that it was the same man, based primarily on the exact phrasing and repetition of, "Do you know the name of your neighbors?" Sitting at the kitchen table, Kate and her boyfriend exit their room and go to the porch for a cigarette. Pretty soon after that, my other sister Jamie exits her room and starts making casual small talk. She made a comment about me looking confused. I then said, "The weirdest thing just happened," and I explained the random guy approaching the door and how I'm confident that this happened on Halloween. At this point, she is just as shook as I am and finds the whole situation super sketchy. After a few minutes of talking, she goes outside to have a smoke with Kate. About a minute or two after she went outside, she sends a text to me that Kate not only remembers the Halloween incident, but Kate is also confident that she had also interacted with someone like this between Halloween 2017 and August 18. At this point, I'm like, what the hell? I go outside and talk with them to get some more details about Kate's encounter and the situation that just happened. The second incident between my two interactions happened sometime when Kate and her boyfriend were home at the time between noon and 3 p.m. during maybe May or June. Kate believed that it very well could have been the same person when I started describing his appearance. This means that some random dude was approaching our house at least 3 times. She also noted that just before they went outside to smoke, they noticed a dark van parked in our driveway when they were looking out the window, and it was not there when they went outside. Kate's room is the only room in the house that can see the front yard, and based on the timeline, the van would have been in the driveway when I answered the door. I did not see the van though, as the west wall by our front door blocks the view of most of the driveway, so I can't say with certainty that the van belonged to the guy at the door. We go back inside and all of us are on edge trying to figure out what to do about this creepy dude. As I said earlier, my initial thought was that this dude was trying to stalk someone. All of us seemed alarmed by how fake of a name Manny O'Brien sounded, so we kept on going on and on about there's no way that that is a real person on our street. Even if this random guy was being truthful, why would he meet someone on Halloween night, then decide 10 months later at 9 p.m. that this would be a perfect time to have a second friend date? On top of that, the guy came to our house on Halloween night asking about the name of our neighbors, as if he was looking for someone, not as if he randomly ran into someone. My sister then threw out the idea that maybe someone was trying to case houses, and he was showing up at random times of the day, which started stressing out all of us, as our parents were expected to be out of the country in a few days for several weeks for their anniversary, and there was no way in hell any of us wanted to be responsible for the house being burglarized. We started trying to decide if this was something worth calling the police over. As we were talking, my mom texted us asking why we were being so loud. I just replied saying the weirdest thing happened, and then asked her if she remembered the man on Halloween asking about our neighbors. She texted back saying that she remembered, but not really. I then told her I would explain in the morning. The next morning, I texted my mom and explained why we were being so hyped up in the kitchen. When I mentioned the idea of someone possibly casing the house, she was rightfully stressed out and freaked out about the entire situation. Noting that she was still bothered by all of the incidents, I figured the best idea would be calling the cops to at least report the incident. Unfortunately, not much came out from calling the police. The detective I spoke with was nice and said incidents like this have happened years back in our neighborhood, but nothing major ever came from it, so we shouldn't be too alarmed. She actually threw out the idea that maybe the guy had gotten a fake address in the same way that is similar to a woman at a bar giving out a fake phone number, but that seemed a bit too far-fetched for me. Who gives out a fake address to someone, and then that person proceeds to show up multiple times to the same address, asking the same question? The officer did agree to do some drive-bys to see if there was any suspicious activity, but I never heard back. On top of calling the police, I also decided to get on the Nextdoor app and post about the incident so any other community members could be aware and keep watch. None of the neighbors had experienced anything like this. They appreciated the post and suggested getting a camera system to guard the doors. As of now, none of us have had any other interactions with this weirdo dude approaching our home, and we hope it stays that way. My parents have refused to put cameras in the front yard because they don't always help with police investigations, and they are expensive. I was able to convince them to put up serious locks on all of the windows, but that only offers up a little security to the situation. We also alerted at least one of our neighbors about the incident, so they too could look out for any suspicious people wandering around the houses. I am very curious if there's actually a Manny O'Brien living in the neighborhood, but not curious enough to hunt him down.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.